So, welcome to Sattva Project, Open Heart and Open Mind. Today I have a very special guest, Dr. John Wittney Pettit, and I will introduce Dr. John so you can know a little bit more about his work. And I'm particular a fan of Dr. John Wittney Pettit work. So, Dr. John has been a student of Buddhism and Tibetan and Sanskrit language since the early 80s, studying with many great teachers from various traditions, most notably His Holiness Dilgo Khyentse Rinpoche. Dr. John holds advanced degrees in Religion and Buddhist Studies from Harvard and a PhD from Columbia University. He spent many years researching the writings of Mipham Rinpoche and eventually published his dissertation as Mipham's Beacon of Certainty from Wisdom Publications 1999. Since 2005, he has translated Tibetan commentaries and carried out extensive research on the topic of Buddha nature. In addition to translation, many unpublished liturgies and commentaries related to practice, he has logged countless hours browsing prophetic manuals in the treasure terma literature and browse avidly the fine print of various sādhanas, rituals, and monk-trail commentaries amongst the collected words of Tibetan authors. So welcome, Dr. John Wittney Pettit. Thank you so much for accepting our request in the Sattva project. So
thank you very much. Thank you very much, Sonia.
No, it's my pleasure because I'm a big fan of your work. Really, I admire a lot your work, and I was waiting for this moment for quite a while. So I'm very happy that today it manifested. So I will start by asking you what really made you start to study Buddhism? What really made you take you to this path to study deeply Buddhist philosophy? And tell us a bit about yourself and how you arrive in here, where you are today, please.
Well, I would say that my interest in Buddhism began probably, I think it's fair to say, at some point in my senior year of high school when I was about 17. But I don't know that it was Buddhism particularly that interested me then. It was just that by that age, I had more or less run the gamut or gone through a list of different topics of personal interest to me, starting when I was, old enough to read and do research on my own, which was maybe 8 or 9 years old. That's when I really started to read a lot of different things, read about whatever I wanted to read about. And, until I was 17, I never really had any particular interest in so-called philosophy or religion. It was more that I was interested in art. I was interested in learning a foreign language. I wanted to learn Sanskrit when I was young, but only because I thought Sanskrit would be a cool thing to learn, not because I thought I wanted to study Buddhism or meditation or anything like that. But by the time I was 17, I started to entertain more serious questions about life, about the meaning of life, the possibility of a past life or a future life, and also how would one know these things? How would one come to some kind of certain knowledge or understanding about such things? Somehow I felt that art, poetry, literature, philosophy, all of these could be avenues into that. And by following any of those, one might also find Buddhism, but there were very few books available on Buddhism, and no one encouraged me until at the age of 17, I met someone who knew something about Buddhism. So that's when I started to read and ask a few questions about it. And that just unfolded naturally from that point forward.
And that's when you decide to study and do a master degree in Buddhism and then a PhD later, right?
Well, as an undergraduate, let's say around the age of 18 or 19, that's when I first met some Tibetan lamas, including His Holiness the Dalai Lama, heard some teachings, attended the Kala Chakra ceremony in Madison, Wisconsin in 1981. And that was a big kind of a shock, kind of a surprise. I thought Buddhism would be very simple, you know, a bunch of old monks sitting around in robes and saying nothing, doing nothing, making no noise, and engaging in no special behaviors other than just sitting there. Somehow I think that was my idea of Buddhism. But the Kala Chakra ceremony, as you know, is very elaborate, involves a lot of different aspects of ritual performance, as well as teaching and guided visualization for the attendees, guided meditation and visualization, which is very, very elaborate and takes days and days and days to complete. So I wasn't exactly pleased to find that, you know, Mahayana Buddhism or Tibetan Buddhism could be so elaborate and so challenging. But at some level, I think that was the right challenge. That only 4 years later, perhaps, became an actual interest in a master's degree.
Very good. And why you decide to start translating this text, like literally and classical languages? Why you decide to start that, like what we say, a Lotsawa?
Well, I'll mention the Kala Chakra in 1981. I sat near the front of the group, maybe 10 rows back under the large tent, which had about 1,000 attendees. And I was close enough that I could see the translator, who most of that time was Jeffrey Hopkins. Robert Thurman, who eventually became my dissertation advisor, was also in attendance. I don't recall that he did much translation at that event, but he was present the whole time. So I was aware that Jeffrey Hopkins and Robert Thurman were effectively two very important people who were close to His Holiness the Dalai Lama. And why was that? Because they both spoke and could read Tibetan. They both had PhDs in Buddhist studies. Jeffrey from the University of Wisconsin and Robert Thurman from Harvard University. So I learned all of this very quickly, and I saw, aha, if I really want to be able to learn what it is that lamas have to teach, then I have to become a translator, because that's the only way to be front and center and right in the channel of the information flow. So that's what motivated me. Plus, honestly, I thought it would be kind of cool to be up there on the stage, you know, with all of the luminaries.
Yes. But then you realized that it was really important to begin a more serious work, and especially going more deep in this literally and classical languages to understand the deep meaning.
That's why. Yes, that's right. And also, when I went to the Kala Chakra, I had already taken a course in Buddhism as a freshman in college. I took a course on Nagarjuna and Madhyamika. And it was the study of Buddhist philosophy in the aspect of the Madhyamika system, which is rigorous and uses logic to establish something like a correct view or a proper philosophical point of view on reality. That was really what, you know, if anything converted me, it was that. It wasn't a leap of faith, and it wasn't some special mystical experience. I had attempted or experimented with meditation. So I had some meditative experiences, but nothing that satisfied my intellectual curiosity. It just increased my curiosity. It didn't satisfy my curiosity. So it was the intellectual approach that made me sure that I wanted to continue with Buddhism. I felt it was rigorous enough. It wasn't vague, and it wasn't strictly an appeal to faith.
I understand. Very good. And another question I have, and I was very curious about it, is why do you choose that text, the topic of your dissertation, like the Mipham's Beacons of Certainty? Why do you choose this text, Dr. John?
Well, first of all, just a bit of background that you mentioned before. Dilgo Khyentse Rinpoche is the most prominent, the most important teacher that I ever was able to spend much time with, not just Rinpoche and myself personally, but as one of the group of people gathered around Rinpoche in one or another of the places where he was giving teachings in the late 80s and early 90s and until 1990 or 91. And so I was very fortunate to be near Rinpoche when he was teaching on numerous occasions in France, Nepal, and the United States. So in the course of doing that, I learned that Rinpoche had met the great Mipham Rinpoche as a baby and regarded him as an important influence in his life, even though he wasn't really Mipham Rinpoche's student, but he was blessed by Mipham Rinpoche. And also, I knew that Mipham Rinpoche was, one of the great teachers of the Dzogchen meditation system or method, and also a great commentator on Madhyamika philosophy and other aspects of Buddhist philosophy. So he was both you could say, a teacher of the yogic method or the mystical approach of Buddhism, as well as a scholar of the rigorous intellectual approach. And by the time I was in my early 20s, when I met Khyentse Rinpoche, I already was quite certain that those two ought to go together. That the best case scenario would be to understand Buddhism very well, but also be very well trained or very well equipped to meditate. But Mipham Rinpoche epitomized that sort of Buddhist master for me.
Very good. So you were very blessed to be in the presence of His Holiness Previous
Dilgo Khyentse Rinpoche. And so Khyentse Rinpoche, inspired me indirectly because of his association with Mipham Rinpoche. And as far as the actual text, the Beacon of Certainty, well, it just happened to be an appropriate choice. It was just like Mipham Rinpoche epitomizes a certain kind of scholar practitioner. The Beacon of Certainty epitomizes, as a text, it epitomizes the analysis of a scholar practitioner.
Very good. That's really a very good reason to choose this topic then. That's great. But why Mipham Rinpoche? Why do you choose Mipham Rinpoche?
Because Mipham Rinpoche, to understand the importance of Mipham Rinpoche historically, one has to understand a little bit about the background of Tibetan Buddhism. But to put it succinctly, or to put it simply, the Nyingma tradition, which Mipham Rinpoche is considered mostly a great scholar and meditator and author of the Nyingma, or ancient translation tradition. And this tradition has, for the most part, been a tradition of yogis. That means, in some cases, yogis who live in a very isolated place, practicing meditation in caves or in small huts, above the valleys and behind the monasteries of Tibet, for example, which are usually on the hillside just to the edge of a valley. And then sometimes way up on the hills, you have retreat centers where yogis meditate. Or in some cases, Nyingma yogis have been householders. That means people who have families, who do business, but also uphold a very disciplined and high level of meditation practice related to the practice of mantra or secret mantra. That means the specific method of Vajrayana or Tibetan Buddhism. And so this is the predominant persona of great practitioners or great adepts, let's say, in the Nyingma tradition. On the other hand, from time to time, the Nyingma tradition has had some great scholars as well as great monastic teachers. And monastic teachers themselves are usually intellectually sophisticated. They're well trained, they're well read. They need to be, because monasticism requires learning. It can't be done in a haphazard way. It's not like living in a village and being an ordinary yogi who has no restrictions. Monks have to be a certain way, and they have to know their own path, and so on. So occasionally the Nyingma have had these great masters who are either monks or scholars, or both monks and scholars. So there are not so many, but over history there have been a few that were very important. Mipham Rinpoche is simply the latest in a series, the others being, for example, the great Khyentse of the 19th century, Khyentse Wangpo, who was Mipham's teacher. Before that, Longchen Rabjam in the 14th century, and before that, Rinpoche Pandita in the 12th century or 11th century, and so on. But these are just a very few names, and Mipham Rinpoche is one of those very few names in 1,000 years of the history in the Nyingma tradition, who really accomplished something special to integrate the yogic or Mantrayana approach with the scholarly approach.
Thank you. May I ask you just a very personal question? Do you have any texts or prayer or sadhana from Mipham Rinpoche that is like a favorite to you? Can you
what a question.
Make this confession?
Well, I would say that that are personally important to me. I would say all of his liturgical writings on Ling Gesar, who is, a mythical figure and the subject of a famous epic. But Ling Gesar is also understood as a special kind of powerful force in the world. It's quite real. And that that power is called Drala. Drala is a kind of energy that relates to the historical past and also to the mythical past. And in the case of Ling Gesar, the energy of Drala relates directly to the great perfectioner Dzogchen teachings and the practice of Mantrayana. It's a support or a framework that helps sustain people who want to devote their lives to that kind of practice or that kind of study. And also, I think, that Ling Gesar inspires a lot of great art and other creative endeavor in this world. And Mipham Rinpoche was the person who made that mythical figure of Ling Gesar into something like an actual meditative system. I think that's an extraordinary contribution, and these days, through Trungpa Rinpoche and the Shambhala tradition, those practices are still done, also by many people in the West. I'd say those are very important to me personally, very precious.
Yes, thank you for the reminder, because I think it's very important, and I really also love Ling Gesar also. So I'm sure many people that are hearing us will identify with your choice. So thank you so much for sharing that. And
yeah, I really wasn't expecting that question came as a not as a complete surprise, because we did discuss the questions before, but I really didn't know that I was going to give that answer. That was interesting.
Everything is impermanent, and some things just happen spontaneously. They display. So this is the beauty of Vajrayana, I guess. It's this magical display. Anyway, what is your opinion about the great 84 Mahasiddha texts and songs, John?
I really don't know very much about the 84 Mahasiddhas. I've just read Keith Dowman's translation and commentary many, many times over the last 35 years or more. I've looked at that book called Masters of Mahamudra many, many times. And on a few occasions, I've heard some teachings based on the mystical songs of those Mahasiddhas, such as Saraha, from great lamas who were themselves great siddhas or great practitioners. This has been on just a few occasions I've had that good fortune. So although I'm not a scholar, I mean, like Keith Dowman, for example, or Per Caverna or other certain scholars in academia who really know a great deal about these materials. But with that proviso, I still have an opinion. I mean, I've felt for a long time that the 84 Mahasiddhas, of course, as a matter of fact, they are the source. For the most part, those 84 are the source of all of the Vajrayana or secret Mantrayana teachings that were eventually transmitted in Tibetan Buddhism. And they also, many of them were great scholars. who transmitted teachings of the sutras, as it happens, but most of them were fairly ordinary people, or people from different walks of life, some of them extraordinary, some of them extremely ordinary, some of them absolutely marginal and questionable individuals, people of uncertain character, even, who became great masters. Men and women both. And of course, that 84 is just an arbitrary number. There were many others like them. Most of them had numerous students who were also highly accomplished. But we don't remember their names because they were probably mostly very ordinary. But basically, they were also liberated. They were enlightened or enlightening beings, bodhisattvas, highly accomplished meditators who lived ordinary lives, just like you and I, or people that we know. So the fact that there's a list of 84 people that includes so many ordinary people, it implies the existence of so many ordinary practitioners, and also the thousands or hundreds of thousands of great meditators in the past whose names are completely forgotten, but they just happen to have been students of these 84 Mahasiddhas. I don't think that we are any different than those ordinary people. We have just as much need for Dharma, and hopefully just as much motivation as those people. So, on the other hand, if we focus on the organized religion aspect of Buddhism, and the fact that for example, many lamas, they sit on high thrones and they have exalted titles and they command a great deal of wealth, and they don't appear to be ordinary at all. But this is obviously not a lifestyle or a model that we can aspire to. We don't have that sort of karma. And so they're not, we can't, for me, it's a little bit harder to relate to that sort of ideal person. Whereas, just at least at the level of legend, many of the 84 Mahasiddhas were more like us.
Yes.
So this is, from people like that, maybe not like me or you particularly, but for people who didn't have any extraordinary qualifications necessarily, and maybe they didn't have very much fame or influence in society, but they did have the instruction and the practice that came from an authentic teacher. And that's all we really need, and we still have access to that. We still have access to authentic teachers and authentic teachings.
We can say that they have access to unbroken lineages, right?
That's right. That's right. A personal connection between teacher and student.
Then I will ask you another question that was not supposed, if you don't mind. Please give me your opinion and talk a little bit about it, about the importance of authentic and unbroken lineages.
Well, this is something that I think many people who are following a contemplative path in other religions as well as Buddhism tend to understand this concept. They may not use the same word or talk about so-called lineage, but for example, in the contemplative practice of Christianity, or in some of the mystical traditions of Islam, or in the teachings of certain teachers, mystical teachers of Islam, and so on, and of course, in the yogic traditions of India, the non-Buddhist yogic traditions, the tradition of Shaiva Siddhanta, or Siddha Yoga, as it is called. For example, one famous branch of that lineage that people know about these days. In all of these traditions, to have a teacher who really knows how to confront you and guide you is considered essential. Everyone seems to appreciate this fact. And in India, particularly, the idea of devotion to a guru, which basically means complete trust, which doesn't necessarily come easily and is not without danger, obviously, to surrender or to completely trust another human being in a spiritual way. It opens up a person to all kinds of dangers, psychological dangers, because even if the teacher is a good one or is an authentic one, that degree of openness and the level of interaction that can happen could be a real challenge to a person's mental health. It could either drive you crazy, or it could, cause you to become enlightened very quickly.
Yes.
I'm not sure that there would be very many alternatives once a person really truly has connected with a teacher. If the teacher is no good, they'll become just as crazy and flawed as the teacher, or worse. If the teacher is authentic, they might still fail and lose their sanity, at least for a while, as I'm sure must have happened with, for example, Naropa when he was following Tilopa, or Marpa when he was a student. Milarepa when he was a student of Marpa, and so on. But the authenticity here, I think, means being willing to take risks. It also means not giving up very easily, even when dealing with the most difficult people and situations. Just based on what his personal students have told me, Trungpa Rinpoche did not give up on people. Once he had really made a connection with a student, and there were many thousands of them, he was willing to work with them, and even the most difficult ones, the most outrageous ones. Not the easy. He spent a lot of time dealing with the really difficult ones, and the easy ones probably he ignored.
Yeah.
So I think authenticity has a lot to do with commitment, with sacrifice, and also being willing to take risks. And one of the risks is no longer being sure if you or your teacher are really authentic or not. That's a moment that we'll all reach at some point, of having a big doubt about that and having to work through that.
Yes. And the unbroken lineages?
Well, that's the unbroken aspect of it, is the authenticity and the depth of emotion that goes with it. That's what causes the chain to remain unbroken. It's the power of the connection, and that includes all of the emotions and all the drama, and also all of the stories, the narratives that generate in the course of having any relationship. Those are our personal narratives. Sometimes they're recorded for history, and like in the case of the 84 siddhas, those narratives become very simple stories that condense a lot of information into a very simplified, stylized relic. But beyond that, in reality, there must have been a very long story, a very personal story. And each of us who has a teacher or who has a Dharma practice has that kind of personal narrative. Chances are nobody's going to remember us in 1,000 years for our story. But that story, if it's full of passion and feeling, is authentic, and therefore, in that case, the lineage is not broken, even though we may be broken, but the lineage is not broken.
Yes, precisely. Very good. Thank you so much. Brilliant explanation. Anyway, may I ask you, like, privately, if you have any favorite Mahasiddha, not favorite, one you identify with, one who deeply inspired you in your path, one of these 84 stories that you know. Is there one particular that really inspires you, or that is very special to you? Because I'm asking you that because I have. So that's why I'm asking you this question about the Mahasiddhas. Do you feel there is one that you identify most?
There are two. Oh. And they're rather different. One is considered the epitome of all of the great siddhas, and the other is, to borrow the expression of Keith Dowman, is a cautionary tale. So first we'll begin with the cautionary tale, which is the siddha Kanhapa, or Nakpopa in Tibetan, or Krishnacharya, the black Acharya. And he was a great scholar and a great mantra practitioner. Also, I believe, a great practitioner of one or several lineages of Yamantaka and so on. So he was a wizard, a magician, or maybe some might have considered him a sorcerer, but he was a Buddhist practitioner. But he was also quite bold and quite confrontational, and he tangled with some very dangerous women, and because of that, he met an early demise. And wasn't able to achieve the highest city in that particular life, even though he was destined to achieve it at some point, not very long thereafter, I'm sure. But apparently, his failure to recognize that women were smarter than him was his downfall.
That is an interesting perspective.
Tangled with some rather dangerous women in my life. I mean, I'm not saying that as a criticism of them, but I can appreciate the risk of thinking that one can mess around too much when dealing with women who are themselves very spiritually accomplished, or at least to have some level of adeptitude. It's a magical, but possibly dangerous world to inhabit with a naive sense of your own superiority. So that's the reason why I like his story. I mean, of course, he was a very great master, and I'm sure that if I studied, all of the implications of his life, I would learn that even if women were his downfall, first of all, really, there are many stories like in Tibetan Buddhism too.
Yes.
The second Dodrip Chen Rinpoche, for example, or even to some extent, Pema Rinpoche got into a lot of trouble, but in the end, things worked out okay for Pema Rinpoche.
Yes.
But the other master, the one that everyone seems to agree on is one of the greatest of the great, maybe the greatest of the 84, is Saraha.
Yes.
And the reason why I like Saraha is because he, at least rhetorically, he takes a very radical approach to pointing out the true nature of mind. And he makes fun of certain people's obsession with ringing bells and playing drums and playing dress-up games, for ritual purposes and so on. And I think that's sort of. Yes, that's a very simplistic assessment of Saraha, but this is why I like Saraha.
Yeah, and his songs are quite brilliant. It's deeply inspiring, and his stories with the kini and the red currish is pretty impressive.
That's right. So he also has a flaw, but fortunately he listens to his wife, his significant other. He doesn't make a big scene or provoke her wrath overly much.
Oh, thank you for this wonderful moment, joyful moment, John. It's nice. I really love it because I think we should take things so joyfully, and for me, honestly, to talk about Mahasiddhas is something that brings me deep joy because, yeah, I think this is very important tradition. I think somehow we are losing, forgetting a bit about this, and it's much more in our days. I think it's extremely important to bring this out because, as you said, and they were normal people, ordinary people. So not
I think
ordinary
it's
in the
still quite
sense of
possible.
ordinary, but they have ordinary lives. So
Well, and also, I think it's still quite possible that we could meet some great practitioners like that. But we might have to spend a lot of time in Asia or other countries, getting to know a lot of different people, doing a lot of practice ourselves, because what would make us capable of meeting a Mahasiddha? I think we would have to, in a way, be prepared for that, because if we weren't prepared by really trying hard and exerting ourselves in practice ourselves, then we might not be able to recognize such a person if we met them. We might not be so lucky to meet them right like that. In other words, you won't necessarily meet a Saraha the first time you go looking for a teacher.
wow, you must have a wonderful karma for that to happen, right?
I think so, and I'll bet that I'm sure that there are many great teachers out there,
Yes.
or historically, where the best disciple they ever have, the most fortunate disciple, isn't necessarily a beginner. like Gampopa coming to Milarepa, for example. Gampopa was already a pretty advanced scholar and practitioner. But when he met Milarepa, then he truly became a great master.
That's true. Thank you. And what is your opinion about Vajrayana in our modern times, Dr. John? What is your opinion about this issue, this particular issue?
On the one hand, it's being propagated very openly. Many people are, to some degree or another, commercializing it or popularizing it and selling it, which is not to imply that there's any other way to do that. I don't know how else, for practical intents and purposes, one could do it. I mean, it costs money to present something as rich as Vajrayana in its proper context. It cannot be presented as just add meditation and shake, like instant coffee. It can't be prepared or consumed so easily. It's much more elaborate. It's like an elaborate feast, like a 12-course meal or a banquet. Vajrayana requires many stages of practice and a lot of study, and also a lot of time, so that both teacher and student can examine one another and form a proper relationship. Not every match is successful between a teacher and a student. So students travel and meet many different teachers and trying to benefit or gain knowledge as much as they can from different people. But unless the student finds one particular teacher who's really just right for them, it may be difficult for them to go very far on the path, and so on. So I think that Vajrayana is as relevant as it ever was. But the ease with which we can access it doesn't necessarily make it more profound. The profundity depends a lot on the particular connection between the student and the teacher. And, the conditions of our time make it, I think, very hard to form that relationship. But that doesn't mean that it isn't happening. It can happen. So I think Vajrayana is as relevant as it ever was. And according to the tradition, and according to the prophecies or prophetic statements in ancient texts in certain places, that the benefits and the power of the Vajrayana will continue to, or the mantra, secret mantra, particularly, I think the word is secret mantra, but the idea is that these teachings will prove themselves useful and powerful even in very difficult times. In fact, the more difficult the times, the more they prove themselves useful and effective. That is, if anyone can muster the discipline to persist in the practice, then they'll definitely see that it still works.
Wonderful. Thank you. That's a very nice answer. And as you said, the discipline and the diligence, and we may say a bit the stubborn, because in our days it's people give up things very easily if they don't get the results as they want in the moment. You know what I mean? So you think Vajrayana path is appropriated to modern times when people have social media, everything on YouTube, everything online? You think this is suitable for many, or just for a few who are stubborn?
Well, I cannot speak for the many because I don't know them. But I can speak for a few that I know well. Yes, it is. I know a few people for whom it really is very good, very helpful. And of course, every Buddhist practice depends on one's own motivation. So anyone who is sincere in their motivation and correct in their motivation, that means they want to study Buddhism to be free and to help others, not to self-aggrandize or to entertain themselves. But we're all tempted to study Buddhism or practice Buddhism at times. We're all, in a way, motivated by the need for self-gratification. And that's what we have to work with in practice. We have to learn to practice not for our own happiness, but for the greater good, and not because practice could make us happy, although it might make us happy, but what it really does is connect us with reality. And sometimes reality is unpleasant. Sometimes it's pleasant. That's the nature of samsara. And until we reach ultimate reality, which doesn't change, there's always going to be pleasant and unpleasant moments. So there's no way to predict how we're going to experience practice. It won't always be pleasant, and it won't always be gratifying. It poses every possible challenge. But anyone who's willing to go through that process, understanding that the big picture involves letting go of their personal gratification or personal wants and needs. At some level, one is giving oneself completely for the benefit of sentient beings. So anyone who does that, and especially in the case of Vajrayana, it's necessary to have that motivation from the very beginning. If that's done, then it works beautifully.
Very good. Thank you so much. Thank you very much. Well, it's been a real pleasure to be here discussing and talking with you about some ideas. I'm sure this is just the first one of a few interviews I would like to do to you, more detailed about some works you have done, and especially about this research you also did, that is very important about the termas. Maybe this is for a next interview, if you kindly accept my invitation to talk about this research and these studies that you did about the manuals in the treasures, the terma tradition. This is something that I really love deeply. So. But I think at the moment for today is more than enough. I think everybody is going to start to know you much better in a sense of people, especially young people that don't know much about your work. And that will be wonderful if they can begin to research and be more aware of your wonderful translations. I just have to finish. I just have one personal curiosity, if you allow me again.
Mm-hmm.
What was the text you most liked to translate, to give you more pleasure, to give you more joy, more entertainment? Not entertainment in a sense of entertainment, but joy, bliss to translate. What was this text that you translate that bring you this feeling?
Well, I'll be honest. I can't think of anything else right now except, and this is still true, even though I don't drink alcohol these days. But there is one chang offering or beer offering written by His Holiness Dilgo Rinpoche. And a friend of mine who used to be a big drinker and a drinking buddy of mine, but also doesn't drink anymore, he asked me for years to translate it. And finally, I translated it for him. And I found, as I studied, Dilgo Rinpoche was, one of the greatest of, he's second to none as a poet. And as a writer on any subject related to Buddhism, really, he had an incredible style. And when he wanted to make something beautiful or sound beautiful, he could do it better than anyone else I've ever read, or as well as anyone I've ever read, like Longchen Rabjam or Mipham Rinpoche and so on. This is Dilgo Rinpoche. He was a great, great poet. And so this offering that he wrote is just so beautiful and so playful. It really captures the pleasure of drinking alcohol in a sacred way, in a celebratory way. And I translated this many years ago, and even now when I read it, I don't have to be drinking to get a lot of joy from reading it.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing that, because sometimes many people think that to translate some texts is quite boring or exhaustive, and I don't think so. I'm not a translator. I don't understand nothing of translations. I just do some things just by my own, enjoyment, nothing else. But I always thought, wow, if I knew about translation, definitely there will be texts that really bring me a lot of joy and bliss to translate. So I knew there must be one that you really would share.
Well,
Thank you.
I just had to mention it because it really is, even though it's a very short prayer, uh, it's it's about precisely that. It's about celebration.
Yes,
And there are many such compositions in Tibetan Buddhism. Not most of them are not about offering alcoholic
yes,
beverages to yourself
yes,
and to
yes.
others, but yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. So, to end our talk today, John, um, what literature you will recommend, or any particular author to our audience? What will you recommend for reading? Let's say like this. What author do you recommend?
Well, there's so much to read, and rather than mention a lot of more recent authors or living authors, and there are many great living authors of Tibetan Buddhism, Tibetan lamas, and also Western practitioners who have written their own books. There are some classics that I will always recommend to anyone who has an affinity for Mahayana Buddhism or Vajrayana Buddhism. And one of those, not books, but collections of books, are the writings of Chogyam Trungpa, especially the books that were edited and published while he was still living. I mean, posthumously, many of his writings or lectures have been published, and some are edited better than others. But the ones that contain his personal voice when he was actually alive, those are the great works of Chogyam Trungpa
Shogyen
Rinpoche, the
Trungpa
transcripts.
Rinpoche.
Religion and Rinpoche. So there are many, many volumes now of his collected works, and of course, more famous books like Cutting Through Spiritual Materialism. It's a classic that never grows old. Every time I reread it, even after 40 years, it still blows me away every time. So that's just Cutting Through Spiritual Materialism. There are other titles there: Shambhala, Sacred Path of the Warrior, and Journey Without Goal, and also what's it called? Training the Mind, his volume on mind training. These are all classics of Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche. He's really the most important author in English for those who are studying Vajrayana Buddhism, I would say, or especially in the Kagyu and Nyingma traditions. I always recommend those. And also for anyone who just needs to learn how to sit and meditate, if you never meet a Zen master, you could still meet the teachings of a great Zen master in Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind.
Yes.
Also,
Thank you so
also a
much.
class.
This is really very good suggestions. I 100% agree with you about Shogyen Trungpa Rinpoche, but I'm suspicious because I really love his work. I love his poetry. I remember Timely Rain. I guess the book, the
Yeah.
poetry book, has amazing, beautiful poems. But I totally agree with you. Thank you for bringing his name out and for remember his amazing work, especially in the West for Westerns that are studying and practicing Vajrayana. I think it's really amazing. Thank you so much for that suggestion, and also a Zen. This is very, very interesting because it's again maybe for the next talk to talk about the similarities between Zen and Dzogchen. But maybe this is for another time, not for now. Today, we already
Sure.
have the very good fortune to know a little bit more about you, about your work, about your ideas, about your suggestions on reading, and about your ideas of the Mahasiddhas, about the importance of the classic and literary languages, and about your work on Mipham Rinpoche, about your dissertation. So I'm very grateful for this time you offer me. That's very generous. And I really hope our audience also like this interview and begin to look and see more about your wonderful work, John. So thank you so much for your kindness. We
Yeah, thank
dedicate the
you.
merits, if they are any, of this interview to the liberation of all sentient beings. And I really hope to see you very soon in the near future. So
Okay,
thank you
thank
very
you.
much.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you from my heart. And I hope
Thank
we
you.
can meet soon. Thank you, John.
Okay. You too,
Thank
Sonia.
you.
Okay.
Thank you very much and enjoy.
Mm,
Enjoy. Thank you. Have a good time.
Okay.
Bye.
Okay. Bye.